To eliminate the target, the man had been guarding this house for 3 days and nights. As a killer who was not top tier but distinct from the rest, his task was to perfect every detail before the assassination. In order to be fully prepared, the killer would familiarize himself with every street and even every shop around the area days in advance. Along with everyone who passed by, he also needed to keep his physical condition at its peak every day. However, no matter what, he couldn't leave any trace at the scene, because he always adhered to a belief: the real risk is not on the day of the assassination, but in the few minutes, hours, or days before or after the mission begins. So, details were the truth he always remembered. Of course, observing the daily routine of the target was essential. Only with thorough understanding could he achieve a decisive kill. Night was the killer's preferred time for assassination, because even the most disciplined mind becomes tired and impatient at this hour. After several days of vigilance, the killer finally saw an opportunity that night. He calmly assembled his weapon and adjusted his position to optimal. Then, he opened the window, put on headphones, applied a few drops of eye drops to alleviate fatigue, and finally, while listening to soothing music, he aimed his gun across the street. At that moment, the target was distracted by a beautiful woman standing in front of him. So, this was the perfect opportunity for assassination. As his heart rate stabilized, he hesitated no longer to load his gun, then aimed straight at the target and pulled the trigger. Missed. Just as he was about to take another shot, the bodyguard on the other side quickly pulled the curtains closed. Seeing the opportunity slip away, he quickly dismantled the weapon and cleaned the scene, then calmly retreated according to the pre-planned escape. Having calculated the timing well, he was able to leave composedly even with the fast response of the police. After disposing of the weapon in a garbage truck away from the target area, he threw his helmet into the water. Then he found a secluded restroom to wash his entire body. After removing the smell of gunpowder and shaving off his beard, he changed into clean clothes. To be safe, the killer did not hesitate to go to the airport, where he disposed of his last self-defense weapon in a trash bin after removing all traces. Only by leaving the city could he ensure his safety. However, facing a police dog at the airport, the killer, after some thought, went back to the restroom to adjust his breathing and wash again. Only after ensuring nothing was amiss did he enter the airport and purchase a plane ticket. Before boarding the plane, the killer informed the organization Hodges of the mission's failure. Upon hearing this, Hodges was furious and ordered him to find another opportunity to eliminate the target at all costs, or they couldn't answer to their employer. Hearing this, the killer hung up the phone without a word. As I said before, he is not a top-tier assassin, but he pays great attention to details of the process, so continuing to stay was out of the question. To avoid being tracked, the killer would take connecting flights back to his home. During the transfer, he could calmly observe everyone around him, never letting his guard down even when the plane landed. Unexpectedly, a man who appeared twice before him raised his suspicion. Although he wasn't a top-tier killer, he was absolutely a fanatic for details. So, without hesitation, he decided to stay at a transit station for one night and changed his ticket for the next day. He then checked into an airport hotel to stay. Even so, the killer remained vigilant. He first placed a cup on the doorknob and then a tray underneath, so that if anyone opened the door, he would be instantly alerted. To be ready for combat at any moment, the killer, with a knife in hand, spent the night sitting on the sofa. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, until the next day when he boarded the plane again. There were no longer any suspicious individuals in sight. Thus, he safely arrived in the city where he lived, drove the car he had prepared in advance, and headed towards a secluded villa. This villa was the home of Magdala, the only woman he deeply loved. But upon arriving at the villa's gate, a series of footprints and cigarette butts on the ground quickly raised his alarm. The killer, without hesitation, drew his pistol and leapt into the area. Moving through the concealed woods, he observed and quickly approached the villa. However, when he entered the house, all he saw was chaos and no sign of anyone. The killer, not reassured, searched every corner of the house until he saw numerous bloodstains and realized something was wrong. To confirm, he called Magdala's brother, Marcus, and learned that Magdala was seriously injured and lying in the hospital. Without hesitation, the killer went to the hospital. There, he finally saw his girlfriend, unconscious. From Marcus's description, the killer learned that Magdala had narrowly escaped and hidden herself. Magdala had witnessed the attacker eventually leaving in a taxi. Initially, She thought it was a robbery, but the assailant didn't take any money or valuables when leaving. A distraught Marcus said that these people weren't after Magdala. After listening, the killer quickly comforted him and promised that he would not let this happen again. After several days of vigil in the hospital, the killer made up his mind. He had to find the person who harmed his girlfriend. So, that night, he dug up all the weapons he had secretly buried. The next day, he prepared all the essentials for a quick evacuation. Then he drove to the city center and located the office building of the taxi company. Finally, on a quiet night, the killer, armed, knocked on the door of the taxi manager. After investigating the date of Magdala's attack, he quickly identified a driver named Leo who had driven to his villa. After 2 days of surveillance, he finally got into Leo's taxi and headed towards the outskirts. When he revealed his weapon, Leo, terrified, thought he was being robbed and immediately handed over his wallet. Under the killer's interrogation, Leo recounted the entire process of going to the suburban villa a few days ago. It turned out that 2 people had taken his taxi from the airport and then drove all the way to the villa in the suburbs. However, what exactly happened inside after they entered, Leo was unaware. After Leo finished explaining all the details, the killer, after a moment's thought, unhesitatingly shot Leo dead. From Leo's account, it was clear to the killer that those 2 were after him. As an assassin, he valued secrecy, so the only ones who could find him so quickly after a failed mission were from the assassin organization Hodges. Having identified his targets, the killer once again flew back to the previous city, because touching him was one thing, but involving his girlfriend was absolutely unacceptable. After landing, the killer drove to his rented warehouses, where he stored a large amount of weapons and various necessities. This time, he plans to infiltrate the company building disguised as a cleaner. The killer first chose a fake license plate and then ordered a batch of cleaning supplies from the supermarket. After equipping himself, he began to stake out day and night. Since entering the building required facial recognition from the surveillance, he had to wait for an opportunity. Soon, the arrival of a FedEx delivery, perhaps due to regular cooperation, easily passed the recognition. So, the killer unhesitatingly followed. He first pretended to be busy and used the courier's help to get through the first door. Then, at the second door, he pretended to drink water, waiting for the courier to leave. Successfully holding the door open, the killer, armed, unhesitatingly located Dolores and then coerced Dolores to find Hodges, who had previously been in contact with him. He first locked Dolores in the next room and then forced Hodges to reveal the specific reasons behind all this. Hodges didn't expect this guy to come to his door, although he was a bit annoyed that he didn't listen to the arrangement. But under the threat of a gun, Hodges still told him that he had no choice. It turns out that because of the failure of the last mission, the employer was very annoyed that the killer did not continue the assassination mission. Even the killer cut off contact with them. So, to teach a lesson, the employer used an address provided by Hodges to find the killer's villa, leading to the incident. However, Hodges thought that no one lived in that villa, so he gave it to them. Upon learning this, the killer pulled out a nail gun. He demanded Hodges give up the employer's and the 2 attackers' information, as well as the backup of his own file, or else Hodges would meet the same fate as the laptop. Unexpectedly, Hodges was tough, stating that he would never give up the employer's information. Hearing this, the killer unhesitatingly rewarded him with several shots from the nail gun, because in his opinion, Hodges could give his information to his employer but not his employer's information to him, which is not an obvious provocation to him. Following Hodges' death, the killer went into the inner room, preparing to eliminate the eyewitness Dolores as well. But Dolores, weeping bitterly, said she had children to care for and hoped the killer would spare her. However, this was obviously impossible, as the most basic quality of the killer was to have no sympathy. Just as he was about to act, Dolores suddenly mentioned she knew the employer's information, and those documents were in her house. Dolores hoped to exchange this information for her life. The killer neither agreed nor refused but untied her. He then packed Hodges' body into a trash can, planning to take Dolores to her house to retrieve the documents. However, while taking the elevator, they were seen by other colleagues in the company. They arrived at Dolores' house without any issues, and the killer successfully obtained the information he wanted. Just when Dolores thought he would keep his promise and spare her, the killer, seizing an unguarded moment, twisted her neck. Being a professional assassin, he needed to eliminate any exposure or dangerous elements in advance. So, regardless of what Dolores did, her fate was sealed. The killer dragged their bodies under the abandoned bridge. It might only be a matter of time before they were discovered, but the killer was not worried about this, as he needed time to erase all traces and withdraw. After taking care of everything, the killer took a connecting flight to Florida. It was a sunny place and the residence of the Brute, one of the assassins who had harmed his girlfriend. Seeing a bulldog in the Brute's yard, the killer didn't hesitate to go to a store and buy a box of the dog's favorite meat. With just a little added ingredient, he could ensure the dog would fall into a deep sleep. After several days of surveillance, the killer finally found the right opportunity. He fed the minced meat to the bulldog bit by bit, then leaned against his car, waiting for the dog to fall asleep. Only when no more barking could be heard did the killer pry open the door and sneak in. The Brute lived alone, so it shouldn't be too difficult to deal with him. But unexpectedly, the Brute was not so simple. After much trouble, the killer finally managed to kill the Brute. However, just as he finished, the dog in the yard suddenly woke up. The killer had bought fake medicine. Fortunately, he managed to escape at the critical moment. Accompanied by the dog's barking, the killer threw a petrol bomb into the Brute's house, the fire erasing any traces of his presence. After eliminating the Brute, the killer took another connecting flight to New York. This time, he wanted another assassin to pay for her actions. Following clues and continuous tracking, he finally identified the other party as a woman named the Expert. To find the right opportunity, the killer had to stake out for several days. Then one day, when the Expert entered a restaurant, he followed without hesitation and revealed his weapon. As a fellow assassin and having seen his photos, the Expert quickly guessed he was here for revenge. However, the Expert was betting that he wouldn't dare to act in such a place. Taking the opportunity, the Expert recounted the events that had occurred. Due to his failure in the last mission and disobedience to the organization, the Expert and another assassin received orders to eliminate him. However, upon reaching the villa based on the address provided by Hodges, they found only a woman at home, the killer's girlfriend, Magdala. The Expert, believing that misfortune should not extend to family, did not harm her, and it was another person who severely injured Magdala, because if the Expert had wanted, Magdala would not have survived. After the Expert finished recounting these events, they stepped outside together. The killer was uncertain whether to believe the Expert's words. As he contemplated whether to act, the Expert suddenly slipped and fell to the ground. Then, the Expert hoped the killer would lend her a hand, but what she received was an unmerciful gunshot. To the killer's surprise, the Expert had a knife in her hand. Had the killer hesitated even a moment, he would have been the one down. After dealing with the two assassins who harmed his girlfriend, the killer set his final target on the employer, Claiborne, who was the real instigator behind everything. Following the information on a card, he took a connecting flight to Chicago. This time, the danger was much higher than before. As Claiborne was a very wealthy man, his residence wasn't just a top-notch apartment, but also heavily guarded. Moreover, Claiborne's travels were always accompanied by bodyguards. To achieve a fail-proof murder, he had to plan everything in advance. Of course, if killing isn't his strongest suit, then his skill in tracking, observing, and paying attention to every detail certainly qualifies him as a top expert. Most importantly, he would meticulously prepare for the assassination's preliminaries and various escape routes. After several days of surveillance, the killer decided to start with Claiborne's bodyguard. The killer discovered that the bodyguard frequently worked out at a gym, so he first purchased an electronic card cloning device. Then, he found the right moment to visit the gym, and next, he pretended to bump into a janitor, cleverly swiping his electronic card. Since the janitor often had to clean the lockers, his electronic card could definitely open all of them. Using this principle, he easily opened the employer's bodyguard's locker and obtained an access card to the apartment, then made a copy of it. Having completed all this, the killer once again lay in wait for the right opportunity. One day, when Claiborne sent his bodyguard out to buy some fruit, the killer did not hesitate to rush into the building. After passing through various checkpoints, he finally appeared silently in Claiborne's room. Seeing him, Claiborne was astonished, thinking he was a burglar, but when the killer showed his weapon and the card, Claiborne realized his identity. Facing the killer's questioning, Claiborne hurriedly explained he had no ill intentions. After the mission went awry, he had received a call from the assassin organization Hodges, but upon knowing the situation, Claiborne merely told them that to err is human, and at worst, it was just a loss of some money. Claiborne never thought of pursuing the matter. However, Hodges advised him to add more money to ensure the employer's identity wouldn't be traced back due to this incident. So, just to be safe, Claiborne added more money, but he assured that he never hired anyone to trouble the killer. It turned out that all this was actually the personal doing of the assassin organization Hodges. To embezzle the money, Hodges issued another task to 2 assassins to kill the killer, using the excuse that he disobeyed the organization's orders. Thus, the subsequent events unfolded. Knowing all the truth, the killer should have eliminated Claiborne according to his ruthless principle, but Claiborne seemed genuinely unrelated to the subsequent events. Knowing Claiborne's hiring of assassins meant he would not call the police, the killer warned him before leaving that he had numerous ways to make his death look like an accident and advised him to be careful. As the scene shifted, the killer and his now-awake girlfriend appeared in an unknown country, enjoying a sunbath. The killer finally showed a long-lost relaxed expression, and thus, the story ends. This is another work by director David Fincher, following high-rated movies like Gone Girl and House of Cards. Although the plot seems somewhat abrupt at the end, the scenes and audio-visual effects are incredibly impressive. I sincerely recommend watching the original film. Thank you for watching. See you next time.